The boardroom fell silent as 13-year-old Zora Jackson finished translating the multi-million-dollar contract. CEO Richard Whitman, who minutes ago had mocked her mother as just the cleaning lady, now stared in disbelief. His reputation and company were suddenly in her small hands. Where are you watching this story from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this opening grabbed your attention, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. Now, let's dive deeper into how this extraordinary confrontation came to be and discover what happens when talent and determination collide with prejudice and power. Zora Jackson was not your average 13-year-old. While most girls her age were obsessing over social media and school dances, Zora immersed herself in a world of languages, dictionaries, and grammar books. Born with an extraordinary gift for linguistics, she could hear a language once and instinctively understand its patterns and rhythms. By 13, she had already taught herself Spanish, French, and was becoming increasingly fluent in Japanese. This talent remained largely hidden from the world, confined to the small two-bedroom apartment on Chicago's South Side where she lived with her mother, Tamika Jackson. Their home was modest but meticulously maintained, filled with second-hand books that Zora treasured like priceless artifacts. Tamika worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat, her primary employment being a cleaning position at Whitman International, a Fortune 500 company headquartered in downtown Chicago. The contrast between their neighborhood and the gleaming skyscraper where Tamika worked could not have been starker. Crumbling infrastructure and under-resourced schools defined their community, while Whitman International occupied 50 floors of prime real estate with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Despite these circumstances, Tamika had instilled in her daughter an unwavering belief in education as the path to a better future. Each morning, Zora would wake at 5:30 to help her mother prepare for the day. Tamika would leave by 6:15, catching 2 buses to reach Whitman International by 7:30, her shift starting an hour before the executives arrived. Zora would then prepare herself for school, walking the 12 blocks to Washington Douglas Academy, where she maintained straight A's despite the school's limited resources. Her teachers recognized her exceptional abilities, but could offer little in terms of specialized education for her unique talents. After school, while waiting for her mother to finish work, Zora would spend hours at the public library. It was there, in the quiet corner of the foreign language section, that she discovered her passion for Japanese. It began with a battered copy of Introduction to Japanese she found buried on a bottom shelf. Something about the elegant characters and the structural logic of the language resonated with her. She progressed quickly through every Japanese resource the small library offered, then turned to free online courses and language exchange forums. She would listen to Japanese podcasts on the ancient library computers, mimicking the sounds until the pronunciation felt natural on her tongue. Anime became her favorite teacher, first with subtitles, then without as her comprehension improved. She dreamed of becoming a translator for the United Nations, imagining herself facilitating understanding between world leaders. In her daydreams, she traveled the globe, respected for her abilities rather than judged by her appearance or background. This dream seemed impossibly distant from her current reality, but it sustained her through difficult days. One Tuesday, during spring break, Tamika received an unexpected call from her supervisor at Whitman International. A Japanese delegation was arriving for important meetings, and the cleaning staff was needed for extra preparation and to remain on call throughout the day. "I need you here in an hour," the supervisor had instructed without room for negotiation. Tamika frantically called her usual childcare options, but no one was available on such short notice. After weighing her limited choices, she made the difficult decision to bring Zora along. "You'll need to be invisible," Tamika explained as they rode the bus downtown. "Find a quiet corner, read your books, and don't draw any attention to yourself." Zora nodded solemnly, understanding the precariousness of her mother's employment. She packed her backpack with schoolwork and her precious Japanese language books, excited despite the circumstances to see inside the famous Whitman Tower that dominated the Chicago skyline. As they approached the gleaming glass building, Zora felt both intimidation and curiosity wash over her. The security guards barely glanced at Tamika's ID badge, their eyes sliding past Zora as if she were truly invisible, just as her mother had instructed her to be. The service elevator took them to the executive floor, where important meetings would be held throughout the day. Zora had never seen such luxury. Marble floors reflected the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Original artwork adorned walls, and sleek furnishings spoke of wealth beyond her comprehension. Her mother quickly found her a small alcove near the executive boardroom, partially hidden by a large potted plant. "Stay here, read quietly, and don't wander," Tamika whispered before hurrying off to begin her duties. Zora settled into her hiding spot, pulling out her Japanese workbook. She had no way of knowing that this day would change both their lives forever. The atmosphere at Whitman International was electric with tension that morning. Richard Whitman, the 58-year-old CEO and majority shareholder, paced the length of the boardroom while barking orders into his phone. His typical arrogance was amplified by anxiety over the approaching meeting with executives from Takashi Technologies, a Japanese firm whose acquisition could cement Whitman International's dominance in the global market. The deal was worth hundreds of millions, but negotiations had been fraught with complications. "Where the hell is Jennifer?" Richard demanded of his assistant, referring to the company's regular translator. The young man trembled slightly as he delivered the news that Jennifer was hospitalized with appendicitis and unavailable for the crucial meeting. Richard slammed his fist on the polished mahogany table, causing water glasses to jump and executives to flinch. "This is absolutely unacceptable. The Japanese sent over a revised contract just last night, and we need to understand exactly what they've changed before they arrive." The boardroom door opened, and Tamika entered quietly with her cleaning cart, intending to make a final pass before the important guests arrived. Richard's cold blue eyes landed on her, narrowing with displeasure. "Not now," he snapped. "Can't you see we're in the middle of something important?" Tamika lowered her eyes. "Sorry, sir. I was told to make sure everything was perfect before the Japanese executives arrive." Richard made a dismissive gesture. "Fine. Just hurry up and be invisible." Tamika moved efficiently around the room, dusting surfaces and straightening chairs. From her hidden alcove just outside the partially open door, Zora could see her mother working diligently, maintaining a neutral expression despite Richard's rudeness. The Japanese delegation arrived precisely on time, led by Hiroshi Tanaka, the dignified CEO of Takashi Technologies. Introductions were made with formal bows, which Richard returned with an awkward nod. The atmosphere was cordial but strained as everyone took their seats. Tamika remained in the corner, waiting for an appropriate moment to slip out unnoticed. The discussion began with pleasantries, translated adequately but stiffly by Richard's assistant, who had studied basic Japanese in college. However, when attention turned to the revised contract, his limitations became painfully apparent. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered under his breath as the assistant struggled with technical terms. Raising his voice, he addressed Mr. Tanaka. "Perhaps we could continue in English? I assume you speak it well enough." The comment hung awkwardly in the air. Mr. Tanaka nodded politely, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "We can proceed in English for general discussion," he replied in accented but fluent English. "However, for contractual matters, I would prefer precise translation to ensure mutual understanding." Richard's frustration mounted visibly. The meeting continued haltingly, with increasing tension. As discussions stalled over particularly complex clauses, Richard's composure began to crack. "Don't these people understand how business works in America?" He whispered loudly to his CFO, not bothering to hide his words from the Japanese visitors. Zora, still positioned near the doorway, could see several pages of the Japanese contract from her vantage point. With her knowledge of the language, she immediately noticed discrepancies between what was being discussed and what was actually written. One particular clause about intellectual property rights contained language that would have given Whitman International far less protection than Richard seemed to believe. As the meeting grew more contentious, Richard's gaze landed on Tamika, who was still waiting for a chance to leave unobtrusively. "Why are you still here?" he demanded loudly, interrupting the ongoing discussion. The cleaning lady doesn't need to hear confidential business negotiations. Tamika flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, sir. I was waiting for a break to leave without disrupting. Richard cut her off. Your job is to clean, not to think. Just go. The Japanese executives exchanged uncomfortable glances at his treatment of Tamika. As she turned to leave, Mr. Tanaka noticed Zora peering through the doorway. Who is that young person? He asked politely. All eyes turned to Zora, who tried to shrink back into her hiding place but was now fully visible. Richard's face darkened with anger. What the hell? Why is there a child in my boardroom? Tamika rushed to explain. She's my daughter, sir. I couldn't find childcare today. She's been sitting quietly outside, not disturbing anyone. Richard's expression shifted from anger to cruel amusement. Well, isn't this charming? Bring your daughter to clean day at Whitman International. Several executives chuckled nervously, while others looked away in discomfort. One junior executive, Marcus Chen, maintained a stoic expression, clearly disapproving of the CEO's behavior. Richard wasn't finished. He gestured for Zora to enter the room. Come in, girl. Since you're here eavesdropping on my meeting, make yourself useful. Zora hesitantly stepped into the boardroom, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her. She stood straight, trying to project confidence despite her racing heart. Richard looked her up and down dismissively. How old are you? 13, sir, Zora replied, her voice stronger than she expected. Richard turned to the others with a theatrical gesture. Gentlemen, perhaps we've been approaching this all wrong. Since we're lacking a proper translator, he picked up the Japanese contract and held it out toward Zora. Translate this. I'll give your mom your job. The boardroom erupted in laughter. Tamika stepped forward. Sir, please. No, Richard interrupted. Let's see what the cleaning lady's daughter can do. He tossed the contract onto the table in front of Zora. Go ahead, impress us. The room fell silent as Zora looked down at the document, her hands trembling slightly. She recognized the complex legal terminology immediately, having studied business Japanese out of curiosity. Mr. Tanaka watched her with undisguised interest, while Richard's smirk grew more pronounced, clearly anticipating her humiliation. Zora took a deep breath and picked up the contract. It was now or never. Her mother's reputation, possibly even her job, hung in the balance. She began to read. Section 7, paragraph 3 states, the licensing rights for all derivative technologies shall remain jointly held by both parties for a period of not less than 5 years, with Whitman International maintaining exclusive distribution rights within North American territories only. Zora's voice, clear and confident, filled the boardroom as she translated the Japanese text flawlessly. The smirk on Richard Whitman's face froze, then slowly dissolved into shock. The Japanese executives leaned forward, their expressions shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise. This differs significantly from the English translation you've been discussing, Zora continued. Your version suggests Whitman would have global exclusive rights, which is not what this Japanese text indicates. Zora's mind traveled back to the countless hours she'd spent in the public library, hunched over Japanese textbooks with worn covers and dog-eared pages. She remembered the day she discovered the language section tucked away in the corner of the building. The librarian had smiled at her curiosity, mentioning that few people ever ventured into that dusty corner. But for Zora, it became a sanctuary. She'd start with basic hiragana and katakana, tracing the characters over and over in her notebook until they became second nature. Then came the more complex kanji, each symbol telling its own story. She remembered staying up late at night, flashlight under her covers, practicing vocabulary while her mother worked night shifts. Japanese anime became her teacher, first with subtitles, then without as her comprehension grew. She'd saved for months to buy a small tablet at a pawnshop, using free Wi-Fi at the library to access language learning apps and Japanese news sites. When she couldn't afford formal lessons, she found language exchange partners online, trading her English expertise for their Japanese knowledge. Each new word and phrase became an escape from the reality of their struggling neighborhood, from the leaking ceiling in their apartment, from the constant worry about money that lined her mother's face with premature wrinkles. In the languages she mastered, Zora found freedom. The section on intellectual property protection, Zora continued, flipping to another page of the contract, contains specific provisions regarding AI-derived innovations that aren't referenced at all in your English summary. The silence in the boardroom was absolute now. Richard Whitman's face had turned an unhealthy shade of red. He stepped forward, attempting to interrupt. "That's enough. Please." Mr. Tanaka held up his hand, stopping Richard mid-sentence. "I would like to hear the young lady continue." He nodded encouragingly at Zora, who took a deep breath and proceeded. "Additionally, the termination clause includes conditions that would allow Takashi Technologies to withdraw from certain joint ventures with only 30 days' notice under specific circumstances, including any public scandals or ethical breaches by Whitman International executives." As she spoke, Zora noticed Marcus Chen, the junior executive who had shown discomfort at Richard's behavior earlier, making rapid notes. His expression shifted between amazement and concern as he verified her translations against the English document in front of him. Richard finally managed to regain his voice. "This is ridiculous. We're supposed to believe that a 13-year-old cleaning lady's daughter just happens to speak fluent Japanese? Someone put her up to this." He turned accusingly toward the Japanese delegation. Mr. Tanaka smiled politely but said nothing, allowing the uncomfortable moment to stretch. "Miss Jackson, Mr. Tanaka." Tanaka finally addressed Zora directly in Japanese, his tone respectful. "Your pronunciation is excellent. May I ask where you studied our language?" Zora responded in equally fluent Japanese, explaining her self-teaching methods and passion for languages. The Japanese executives exchanged impressed glances, clearly appreciating both her linguistic skills and her humble explanation. Richard's face darkened further as he watched the exchange he couldn't understand. "English in my boardroom," he snapped. "This is America." Marcus Chen cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may." All eyes turned to the young executive of Chinese-American heritage, who had rarely spoken up in previous meetings. "I speak conversational Japanese, and I can confirm that Zora's translation appears accurate. There are indeed discrepancies between the Japanese original and our English version." Richard's expression shifted from disbelief to fury. "And you're just mentioning this now, Chen? Were you planning to let us sign a disadvantageous contract?" Marcus maintained his composure despite the public criticism. "Sir, I'm not fluent enough to have caught all the nuances. I only recognized the discrepancies after hearing Zora's more detailed translation." "So now you're praising the cleaning girl. Perhaps you'd like to join the janitorial staff?" Richard's voice dripped with sarcasm. The Japanese executives watched this exchange with evident disapproval, several of them whispering among themselves. Mr. Tanaka turned to Zora again. "Would you mind looking at Section 12? We had particular concerns about the language there." Zora nodded and turned to the relevant page. As she translated this complex section dealing with dispute resolution mechanisms, she noticed additional problematic language that would have heavily favored Takashi Technologies in any legal disagreements. After explaining these issues, she looked up to find Mr. Tanaka studying her with newfound respect. "Remarkable," he said simply. The meeting continued with Zora effectively serving as the translator, highlighting several other significant discrepancies that could have cost Whitman International millions if left uncorrected. Richard attempted repeatedly to end this unexpected turn of events, but the Japanese executives clearly preferred communicating through Zora, whose translations were precise and unbiased. After an hour of this humiliating situation, Richard abruptly stood. "I think we've all had enough excitement for one day. Let's reconvene tomorrow with a proper professional translator." His tone left no room for discussion. As the Japanese executives gathered their materials, Mr. Tanaka approached Zora directly. "You have an extraordinary gift, Miss Jackson. Thank you for your assistance today." He handed her his business card with both hands, a gesture of respect in Japanese culture. Richard watched this interaction with barely contained rage. Once the Japanese delegation had left, he turned on Tamika and Zora. "Both of you, in my office. Now." The walk to Richard's corner office felt interminable. Zora could feel her mother trembling beside her and reached out to squeeze her hand reassuringly. Inside the spacious office with its panoramic view of Chicago, Richard didn't invite them to sit. "I don't know what kind of stunt you two pulled today, but it ends now," he began, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sir, my daughter didn't," Tamika started. "Silence." Richard slammed his hand on his desk. "You brought an unauthorized person into a confidential business meeting. That alone is grounds for immediate termination. Do you think Richard is right to blame Tamika for bringing Zora to work? Or is he just looking for an excuse to punish them for embarrassing him?" Comment number 1. If you believe a mother should never be punished for doing what she needs to care for her child while working, hit that like button if you're amazed by Zora's hidden linguistic talents, and subscribe to see more stories about extraordinary hidden talents being discovered in unexpected places. What would you do if you were in Zora's position? Would you have kept quiet to protect your mother's job, or spoken up to correct the mistakes in the translation? Let's continue our story and find out how Zora and Tamika handle this dangerous confrontation with a powerful man who feels threatened by a 13-year-old girl's intelligence. The next morning, Tamika received a call from Human Resources at Whitman International before she had even finished her first cup of coffee. The voice on the other end was professionally detached, informing her that she was being reassigned to night shift janitorial duties, effective immediately. "This is a disciplinary reassignment," the HR representative explained. "Mr. Whitman has cited several policy violations, including bringing an unauthorized minor into a confidential business setting." Tamika gripped the phone tightly, struggling to maintain her composure. "I understand," she replied, though she wanted to scream about the unfairness of it all. After hanging up, she found Zora at the small kitchen table, already dressed for school but staring blankly at her untouched bowl of cereal. "This is all my fault," Zora whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "If I had just stayed quiet, you wouldn't be in trouble." Tamika sat beside her daughter and took her hands. "Listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You showed your brilliance yesterday, and no one can take that away from you. We'll figure this out." Despite her mother's reassurance, Zora carried the weight of guilt with her throughout the school day. Her usual enthusiasm for learning was dimmed by worry about their future. Her favorite teacher, Miss May Parker, noticed her distraction during English class. "Zora, could you stay for a moment after the bell?" she asked gently. When the other students had filed out, Miss Parker closed the classroom door. At 36, with a decade of teaching in underserved communities, she had developed a keen sense for when her students were struggling with issues beyond academics. "Something's bothering you today," she observed. "Is everything okay at home?" The genuine concern in her voice broke through Zora's resolve to keep her troubles private. The whole story came tumbling out: the boardroom incident, her mother's reassignment, and her fear that she had made things worse by showing up Richard Whitman. Miss Parker listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration and finally to determination. "Zora, what you did took incredible courage, and your language abilities are truly exceptional." She hesitated, then continued. "I have a friend who works with a nonprofit that provides legal support for workplace discrimination cases. Would you like me to put your mother in touch with them?" Zora nodded gratefully, though uncertainty clouded her features. "But what if Mr. Whitman retaliates even more? He seems really powerful." Miss Parker's expression softened. "That's exactly why organizations like this exist, to help people stand up to power when it's being abused." Across town, in the executive suite of Whitman International, Richard Whitman was holding an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. His face was flushed with anger as he paced the length of the conference room. "Yesterday was an absolute disaster," he fumed. "We looked unprepared and unprofessional in front of the Japanese." His CFO, Thomas Blackwell, attempted to inject some perspective. "To be fair, Richard, the girl did identify some significant translation issues that could have cost us millions if left uncorrected." Richard stopped pacing and fixed Thomas with an icy stare. "That's not the point. The point is that a 13-year-old made us look like fools. And not just any 13-year-old, but the daughter of a cleaning woman." He spat the last words as if they tasted bitter. The room fell uncomfortably silent. Marcus Chen, seated at the far end of the table, kept his expression carefully neutral, despite his disgust at Richard's obvious prejudice. Richard turned to his head of security. "What do we know about this girl? Zora Jackson? Run a complete background check. I want to know everything." The security director nodded, making a note. "Already underway, sir. Preliminary information shows she's a straight-A student at Washington Douglas Academy. Several teachers have noted her exceptional aptitude for languages and mathematics." Richard absorbed this information with a deepening scowl. "So she's clever. That makes her more dangerous, not less." He turned to his HR director next. "And the mother, Tamika Jackson? 10 years of employment with us, sir. No disciplinary issues until now. Actually has an exemplary work record." Richard waved this away impatiently. "Reassign her to night shift. Minimal contact with executives or visitors." The HR director cleared her throat nervously. "That's already been done, sir. As you requested yesterday." "Good." Richard nodded, then addressed the entire room. "I want it made absolutely clear that this girl is not welcome in this building again. And if anyone his gaze lingered meaningfully on Marcus Chen has any further contact with either of them outside of strict professional necessity, there will be consequences." The threat hung in the air as the meeting concluded. Marcus remained in his seat, pretending to review notes until the others had left. Once alone, he pulled out his phone and composed a text message to a number he had obtained discreetly from employee records. "Miss Jackson, this is Marcus Chen from Whitman International. I witnessed what happened yesterday. Would like to talk. Your choice of location." He hesitated before hitting send, knowing he was risking his career, but unable to ignore the injustice he had witnessed. That evening, as Tamika prepared for her first night shift, her phone buzzed with Marcus's message. She stared at it with suspicion and fear. "Who's that?" Zora asked, looking up from her homework. Tamika showed her the message. "One of the executives from yesterday, the one who backed up your translation." Zora remembered him the only person in the boardroom who had shown any decency. "Maybe he wants to help," she suggested hopefully. Tamika shook her head. "Or maybe it's a trap. Richard Whitman could be using him to build a case against me." She deleted the message without responding. "We can't trust anyone connected to that company right now." As the week progressed, Tamika's reassignment proved to be just the beginning of Richard's retaliation. Her night shift hours were reduced, cutting her income dramatically. Meanwhile, Richard had instructed his team to investigate every aspect of Zora and Tamika's lives, looking for leverage or vulnerabilities. The cleaning service that contracted with Whitman International for Tamika's secondary job mysteriously decided they no longer needed her services. By the following week, Tamika was down to a single income source, working nights at Whitman and struggling to find replacement work during the day. The constant schedule changes and stress began to take a physical toll. Tamika developed a persistent cough that kept her awake during the precious few hours she had to sleep. Still, she refused to miss work, knowing she couldn't afford to lose her remaining job. After 3 days of watching her mother's health deteriorate, Zora made the difficult decision to stay home from school to care for her. "You can't miss school," Tamika protested weakly from her bed, her voice hoarse from coughing. "Your education comes first, always." Zora gently tucked the blanket around her mother. "One day won't hurt. You need rest, and someone needs to pick up your prescription." She didn't mention that they were running dangerously low on funds or that she had emptied her small savings to pay for the medicine her mother needed. That afternoon, while Tamika finally slept, Zora sat at their small kitchen table surrounded by bills. The reality of their situation was becoming alarmingly clear. Without Tamika's full income, they would be unable to make next month's rent. Zora's perfect attendance record at school was now broken, and her dream of qualifying for academic scholarships seemed to be slipping away along with their financial stability. As she sorted through the mounting bills, Zora's resolve hardened. Richard Whitman had used his power and privilege to punish them simply because his ego was bruised by a 13-year-old girl who happened to speak Japanese. The unfairness of it burned in her chest. She would find a way to fix this situation, not just for her mother's sake, but because what was happening to them was wrong. Zora pulled out a notebook and began to write, organizing her thoughts and plotting a path forward. She might be young, She might lack Richard's wealth and connections, but she had her mind, her languages, and most importantly, the truth on her side. She would find a way to turn this situation around, though she had no idea yet how dangerous that path would prove to be. 3 days after the boardroom incident, Zora's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Mr. Tanaka from Takashi Technologies. Would you be available to meet regarding a potential opportunity? You may bring your mother or another adult if you prefer." Zora stared at the message in disbelief, wondering how he had obtained her number and what kind of opportunity he might be referring to. She showed the text to her mother, who was finally well enough to sit up and eat a proper meal. Tamika frowned with concern. It could be related to Richard somehow. "I don't trust this." Before Zora could respond, another text arrived. "Marcus Chen suggested I contact you directly. He mentioned your current difficulties. This additional information changed the equation somewhat." Though Tamika had ignored Marcus's outreach, the fact that he was apparently helping them behind the scenes suggested he might genuinely be on their side. After careful discussion, Tamika and Zora decided to cautiously respond, agreeing to meet Mr. Tanaka at a public restaurant near their apartment, rather than anywhere associated with Whitman International. What they didn't know was that Richard Whitman had implemented surveillance measures following the boardroom incident. Through the company's IT department, he had gained access to Marcus Chen's company email and text messages. When Marcus arranged the meeting between Mr. Tanaka and Zora, Richard was informed immediately. The day of the meeting arrived, and Zora dressed in her best clothes, a simple blue blouse and black pants that she kept for special occasions. Tamika, still recovering and unable to take time off from her night shift without risking termination, reluctantly allowed Zora to meet Mr. Tanaka, with Miss Parker accompanying her instead. The restaurant was a small, family-owned Japanese establishment called Sakura Garden. When Zora and Miss Parker arrived, they found Mr. Sains, the Mr. Sayo, and Mr. Cursons. Tanaka already seated at a quiet corner table. He stood and bowed respectfully as they approached. "Thank you for coming, Miss Jackson," he said warmly. "And thank you, ma'am, for accompanying her." Miss Parker introduced herself as Zora's teacher, and they all sat down. After ordering tea, Mr. W. Tanaka came directly to the point. "Miss Jackson, your linguistic abilities are truly exceptional. Our company values such talents greatly. I would like to offer you a paid internship as a junior translator for the ongoing negotiations with Whitman International." Zora's eyes widened in surprise. "An internship? But I'm only 13. Mr. Senquote." Tanaka nodded. "Age is less important to us than ability. We would work within appropriate labor laws, limiting your hours and ensuring your education remains the priority. The position would include a scholarship fund for your future education." Miss Spark 27. Parker leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. "This is extremely generous, Mr. Tanaka. May I ask what prompted this unusual offer?" Mr. Tanaka set down his teacup carefully before responding. "When I was 14, growing up in Osaka, I encountered a similar situation. An American businessman mocked my English during a meeting with my father, who was a small factory owner. I had taught myself English through books and American radio programs, but was too intimidated to speak up." He paused, his expression reflective. "I have never forgotten the shame of that moment, or how differently things might have gone had I found my courage as Zora did. When talent appears, it should be nurtured, not crushed because of prejudice." As they discussed the details of the internship, none of them noticed the man in a business suit seated at the far corner of the restaurant, discreetly photographing their meeting with his phone. Back at her apartment, Tamika was preparing for her night shift when her supervisor called. "Jackson, don't come in tonight," he said brusquely. "Why? Is something wrong?" Tamika asked, a knot forming in her stomach. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Security footage shows you removing company property from the premises last week." Tamika was stunned. "That's not true. I've never taken anything that wasn't." "Save it for the exit interview," the supervisor interrupted. "HR will contact you tomorrow. Turn in your badge at security if you come to collect your things." The line went dead. Tamika sat heavily on the edge of her bed, the phone still clutched in her trembling hand. She knew exactly what had happened. Richard Whitman was making good on his threats. The timing, just as Zora was meeting with Mr. Tanaka, couldn't be coincidental. When Zora returned home excited about the internship opportunity, she found her mother sitting in their darkened living room, still in her uniform. "Mom, what's wrong? Why aren't you at work?" Tamika looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "I was fired. They're claiming I stole company property." Zora gasped, immediately connecting the dots. "This is because of my meeting with Mr. Tanaka, isn't it?" Richard somehow found out. Tamika nodded slowly. "I think so. And there's more." She handed Zora a letter that had arrived that afternoon. It was from their landlord, informing them that the building had been purchased by a new investment company, and all rents would increase by 40%, effective in 30 days. "We can't afford this," Tamika said softly. "Not with me unemployed." Zora read through the letter, noting the name of the investment company, Whitman Capital Partners. It seemed too coincidental to be anything but connected to Richard Whitman. The realization of how far Richard would go to punish them sent a chill through her. "I should turn down the internship," Zora said, setting aside her excitement for the opportunity. "We need to focus on finding you a new job and a place we can afford." Tamika straightened her shoulders, a flash of determination cutting through her exhaustion. "No, you will not let that man take this opportunity from you. We'll figure something out." The following day brought another potential ally into their lives. A community organizer named Desiree Washington knocked on their door, introducing herself as a representative from the Southside Housing Justice Coalition. "We've been monitoring this building since the sale," she explained, settling onto their worn sofa. "Your situation isn't unique. This company has a pattern of buying affordable housing, raising rents to force out current tenants, then renovating and charging luxury rates." As Desiree outlined resources and legal options for fighting the rent increase, Zora found herself studying the confident woman. In her early 30s, Desiree had the energy and strategic thinking of someone who had faced powerful opponents before and knew how to win. "The problem is," Tamika explained, "even if we could delay the increase, I just lost my job. Finding new employment quickly will be difficult, especially if Whitman blacklists me." Desiree's eyebrows rose. "Whitman? As in Richard Whitman, the billionaire?" When they explained the connection between their housing crisis and Zora's boardroom translation, Desiree let out a low whistle. "That's quite a story, and potentially very interesting from a legal perspective. Retaliation, discrimination there, could be multiple violations there." Meanwhile, Marcus Chen was taking significant risks of his own. Having discovered that his company communications were being monitored, he began carefully documenting Richard's actions using personal devices and creating an encrypted record of potential legal violations. He knew his career at Whitman International was likely already compromised, but he couldn't stand by while Richard abused his power to crush a talented young girl and her hard-working mother. That evening, as Zora considered the internship offer, she felt torn between exciting opportunity and practical necessity. The position with Takashi Technologies would provide valuable experience and future educational funding, but it wouldn't solve their immediate housing crisis or replace her mother's income. She was about to call Mr. Tanaka to regretfully decline when Desiree called with unexpected news. "I've been making some calls," she said without preamble. "There's a pro bono legal clinic interested in your mother's wrongful termination case, and I've found temporary housing available through our emergency program if you need it." The pieces were falling into place, offering a glimmer of hope in their darkening situation. After another family discussion, Zora made her decision. She would accept the internship not just for the opportunity it represented, but as the first step in a larger plan to expose Richard Whitman's discriminatory practices and abuse of power. She didn't yet know exactly how, but she was determined to turn this situation around. The internship would give her access and information that might prove crucial. As she called Mr. Tanaka to accept the position, Zora felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was about to enter the corporate world that had so callously discarded her mother, but this time she would be prepared. This time she would not be invisible. And someday soon, Richard Whitman would regret ever underestimating the cleaning lady's daughter. Zora's first day as an intern at Takashi Technologies' temporary Chicago office began with a mix of nerves and determination. She had memorized the business etiquette guidelines Mr. Tanaka had sent her and dressed in a conservative navy blue dress purchased from a thrift store. At 13, she looked younger than most interns, but her serious expression and perfect posture projected a maturity beyond her years. Mr. Dottie ended in time late. Tanaka personally introduced her to the international team, explaining her role without mentioning her age. Miss Jackson will be assisting with translations and cultural context for our negotiations with Whitman International, he stated simply. The team members, a mix of Japanese and American professionals, welcomed her warmly, though a few exchanged curious glances at her youth. Her workspace was a small desk in the corner of the open-plan office, equipped with a computer and dual monitors. Her first assignment seemed straightforward, translating a series of emails and meeting minutes from Japanese to English. As she began working, Zora discovered her natural aptitude extended beyond language itself to the business concepts being discussed. The technical terminology that might have confused most 13-year-olds made intuitive sense to her. By lunchtime, she had completed translations that would have taken most professionals the entire day. Mr. Sation sate. Tanaka reviewed her work with undisguised admiration. "Exceptional," he commented. "Your understanding of nuance is remarkable." Zora flushed with pride but maintained her professional demeanor. "Thank you, sir. I enjoy the challenge." As the day progressed, she was invited to sit in on a strategy meeting where the team discussed upcoming negotiations. Here, Zora's unique perspective proved valuable in unexpected ways. When one executive mentioned Richard Whitman's negotiation tactics, Zora hesitantly raised her hand. "May I offer an observation?" Mr. Tanaka nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Tanaka, Whitman seems particularly reactive when he feels his authority is challenged," she noted. "He becomes defensive and more likely to make demands rather than compromises." The team fell silent, considering her insight. "That's very astute," the chief negotiator finally commented. "How would you suggest we approach him?" Zora thought carefully before responding. "Perhaps by framing concessions as his idea, or finding ways to let him feel he's winning even when the actual terms favor balance." The meeting room erupted in approving murmurs and nods. Mr. Tanaka smiled. "This is precisely why diverse perspectives are valuable." "Thank you, Miss Jackson." After 3 days working with Takashi Technologies, Zora had earned the team's respect and was being given increasingly complex assignments. Meanwhile, her mother continued searching for new employment with little success. Each application seemed to hit an invisible wall. Positions that should have been available suddenly weren't. Interviews were canceled last minute. It became increasingly clear that Richard Whitman's influence extended far beyond his own company. The eviction timeline loomed closer, with just 23 days remaining before their rent would increase beyond their means. Desiree Washington had secured them a spot in emergency housing, but it was a temporary solution at best. On her 5th day as an intern, Zora was working late, helping prepare documents for the next day's negotiations with Whitman International. The office was mostly empty when Marcus Chen slipped in, having texted her earlier to arrange a discreet meeting. "How are you holding up?" he asked, settling into a chair beside her desk. Zora sighed. "The internship is amazing. Everything else is falling apart." She explained her mother's employment difficulties and their housing situation. Marcus nodded grimly. "Richard's reach is extensive. He's called in favors throughout the industry." He hesitated, then added, "That's why I wanted to meet with you. I think you should know what you're really up against." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined the corporate structure of Whitman International, explaining how Richard maintained control through a complex web of subsidiaries and strategic relationships. "The company presents itself as progressive and diverse in public," Marcus explained, "but internally, the culture mirrors Richard's biases. Promotion patterns, salary discrepancies, and assignment of high-profile projects all show clear patterns of discrimination." Zora listened intently, taking careful notes. "Is there documentation of this?" Marcus nodded. "I've been collecting data for months, initially for a diversity initiative I hope to propose. Now I'm thinking it might serve a different purpose." His expression grew serious. "But Zora, you need to understand, Richard plays hardball. If he realizes you're building a case against him, he'll come at you with everything he has." Zora considered this warning. "He's already trying to destroy my mother's career and make us homeless. What more can he do?" Marcus's expression darkened. "You'd be surprised." The following week brought a new development. Takashi Technologies' negotiations with Whitman International had advanced to the final stages, requiring daily meetings between the teams. Initially, Zora worked behind the scenes, translating documents and preparing briefings. But as the negotiations grew more technical, Mr. Sexine ADZ, Tanaka requested her presence in the actual meetings. "Your insights are too valuable to leave in the office," he explained. "Just observe and take notes. If you notice any translation issues, write them down for discussion afterward." The first joint meeting was held at Whitman International's headquarters. Zora felt a knot in her stomach as she entered the familiar building where her mother had worked for years. The security guard did a double-take when checking her visitor badge, clearly recognizing her from before, but said nothing as she passed through with the Takashi team. They were escorted to a different boardroom than the one where the infamous translation incident had occurred. Zora kept her head down, hoping to remain unnoticed by any executives who might recognize her and inform Richard. For the first hour, the strategy worked. She sat quietly at the far end of the table, taking meticulous notes on her tablet as the teams discussed technical specifications and implementation timelines. The Whitman team seemed unaware of her significance, just another junior staff member among many. Then, during a brief recess, Richard Whitman himself entered the room unexpectedly. His gaze swept across the gathered professionals, stopping abruptly when he spotted Zora. His face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, striding toward her. "Why is this girl in my building again?" Mr. Tanaka stepped forward smoothly. "Miss Jackson is part of our translation team. Mr. Whitman, her skills have proven invaluable to our discussions." Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I want her removed immediately. She is not welcome in this building." A tense silence fell over the room. Mr. Tanaka remained calm but firm. "Miss Tanaka, Jackson's presence is non-negotiable for our team. If she is asked to leave, we will need to reschedule today's discussions." The implication was clear: the deal that Whitman International desperately needed might be jeopardized. Richard's jaw tightened as he calculated the costs of his anger. Finally, he spoke through clenched teeth. "Fine, but she stays at the back of the room, not at the table." Without waiting for a response, he stalked out. The negotiations resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. Zora could feel eyes on her throughout the meeting, some curious, others hostile. She maintained her professional demeanor, focusing on her work despite the uncomfortable scrutiny. After the meeting, Marcus found a moment to speak with her privately. "He'll be looking for ways to remove you now," he warned. "Be extremely careful about everything you do and say in this building." Zora nodded, understanding the danger. "I've been documenting everything I've observed about discrimination here," she confided. "Not just what happened to my mom and me, but patterns affecting others." Marcus looked alarmed. "That's exactly the kind of thing that could get you in serious trouble." "Richard has the legal resources to crush most challenges." "Then we need more than just documentation," Zora replied thoughtfully. "We need allies." The following day, Richard implemented his counterattack. First, Marcus was abruptly demoted and reassigned to a subsidiary office in Detroit, effective immediately. Then, when the Takashi team arrived for the day's negotiations, Richard was waiting with his legal counsel. Before we proceed, he announced, all participants must sign updated confidentiality agreements. He nodded to his assistant, who distributed documents to everyone present. When Zora received hers, she realized it was different from the others. A specialized non-disclosure agreement with extensive non-disparagement clauses and severe penalties for violations. This is specifically for non-employees with access to proprietary information, Richard explained with a cold smile when she hesitated. Sign it, or today's meeting is concluded, Mr. Tanaka quickly reviewed the document, his expression darkening. "This goes well beyond standard confidentiality protections," he observed. "It effectively prevents Miss Jackson from discussing anything she observes at Whitman International, including potentially illegal practices." Richard's smile never wavered. "It's non-negotiable." Zora felt trapped. Refusing would mean losing her position with the Takashi team and any chance of helping her mother. Signing would mean surrendering her ability to expose Richard's discriminatory practices. She looked up at Mr. Tanaka, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod, a signal to trust him. With a deep breath, she signed the document, wondering if she had just signed away their only hope of justice. Have you ever felt cornered into making a difficult decision where both options seemed wrong? Comment number 1 if you've been in a situation where powerful people used unfair tactics against you. Like this video if you're rooting for Zora to find a way to outsmart Richard, despite the odds stacked against her. Subscribe to see how this battle between a billionaire CEO and a 13-year-old linguistic prodigy unfolds. Do you think Zora made the right choice by signing the NDA, or should she have refused and found another way to fight back? As Zora hands the signed document back to Richard, she notices something in his eyes. Beyond triumph, there's fear. He's afraid of her. This powerful billionaire, afraid of what a 13-year-old girl might reveal about him. Perhaps that fear is exactly what she needs to exploit. That evening, Zora sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the copy of the non-disclosure agreement she had signed. The legal language was dense, but she understood enough to know that Richard had attempted to silence her completely. What he didn't realize was that his heavy-handed tactics had only strengthened her resolve. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Need to talk. Secure channel. Download Signal app?" She followed his instructions, and minutes later received an encrypted message. "Richard's reaction proves he's vulnerable, but we need more than just your experience to build a case. Are you willing to connect with others?" Zora responded immediately. "Yes. Tell me how." The next day, during her lunch break at Takashi Technologies, Zora met Marcus at a small cafe 3 blocks from the office. Despite his demotion, he hadn't yet relocated to Detroit, using accumulated vacation days to remain in Chicago. "The NDA you signed has vulnerabilities," he explained, keeping his voice low. "It can't legally prevent you from reporting discrimination or harassment to appropriate authorities. Richard knows this, but he's counting on intimidation to keep you quiet." Marcus slid a napkin across the table with a name and phone number written on it. Carmen Rodriguez. She was a senior marketing executive at Whitman until last year. Call her. That evening, Zora called the number. Carmen answered on the second ring, her voice cautious until Zora mentioned Marcus. "So, you're the prodigy translator who embarrassed Richard Whitman," Carmen said, a hint of admiration in her tone. "Marcus told me about you." Over the next hour, Carmen shared her story. After 15 years with Whitman International, consistently outperforming her peers, she had been passed over for promotion 7 times, always in favor of less qualified white males, she explained. "When I finally filed a complaint with HR, I was gradually sidelined, then offered a generous severance package to leave quietly." Carmen had documents, performance reviews, company metrics, emails all supporting her claim of discriminatory treatment. "I considered legal action," she admitted. "But fighting a billionaire in court seemed impossible. He has teams of lawyers and unlimited resources." Zora explained her situation, her mother's termination, their impending eviction, and Richard's attempts to silence her. "What if it wasn't just you fighting alone?" she suggested. "What if we found others with similar experiences and stood together?" Carmen was quiet for a moment. "That would be powerful, if it could be done safely." Over the next week, through Carmen and Marcus, Zora connected with 6 other former or current Whitman employees who had experienced discrimination. A black executive who discovered he was paid 40% less than his white counterparts. An older administrative assistant pushed out through a fraudulent performance improvement plan. A qualified female engineer repeatedly denied project lead roles. Each had documentation, each had stories, and each had been isolated until now. Meanwhile, Desiree Washington had been hard at work on the housing front. She discovered that Whitman Capital Partners had purchased 7 other affordable housing buildings in predominantly minority neighborhoods, implementing the same aggressive rent increases. "It's a pattern of discriminatory displacement," she explained, during a strategy meeting at the community center. "We're building a fair housing case." As the alliance grew, Tamika continued her relentless job search, finally securing a position as an office cleaner with a small local company at significantly lower pay than her previous jobs. The emergency housing Desiree had arranged would be available when they needed to leave their apartment, but it was a shared space, far from Zora's school and Tamika's new job. Despite these challenges, Tamika maintained her unwavering support for her daughter. "You're fighting for something bigger than just us now," she told Zora. "I couldn't be prouder." On a bright Tuesday morning, Zora arrived at Takashi Technologies to find Mr. Tanaka waiting for her. "We have a situation," he said, ushering her into his office. "Whitman International has requested that you personally attend today's contract finalization meeting." Zora felt a flutter of anxiety. "Why would they ask for me specifically?" Mr. Tanaka's expression was grave. "They claim they want to ensure translation accuracy for the final documents. But I suspect Richard Whitman has other motives." He hesitated before continuing. "You should know that our company's legal department has reviewed your NDA. While it appears restrictive, it cannot legally prevent you from reporting ethical violations or discrimination. Remember that if Richard attempts to pressure you further." The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock at Whitman International. As Zora prepared, she received an unexpected call from a journalist with the Chicago Tribune. "I'm working on a story about prodigy translators," the woman explained. "Your name came up in connection with Takashi Technologies. Would you be willing to discuss your work?" Zora immediately suspected Richard's hand in this, perhaps setting her up to violate her NDA by speaking to the press. "I'm sorry, but I can't comment at this time," she responded carefully. The journalist pressed for details about her background and how she learned Japanese, questions that seemed designed to lead her into discussing the infamous boardroom incident. Zora maintained her composure, politely declining to answer. After ending the call, she texted Marcus, "Tribune reporter fishing for NDA violations. Richard getting desperate?" His response was immediate. "Keep records of all contact attempts. Part of a pattern we're documenting." That afternoon, Zora entered the Whitman International building with the Takashi team, her tablet containing the final contract translations clutched tightly against her chest. The meeting room was crowded with executives and legal counsel from both companies. Richard Whitman sat at the head of the table, his expression inscrutable as Zora took her seat. The negotiations proceeded smoothly at first. The weeks of preparation had resolved most contentious issues, and the final contract was largely a formality. During the review of technical specifications, a question arose regarding a particular Japanese term with multiple possible interpretations. All eyes turned to Zora. "Miss Jackson," Richard said with exaggerated politeness, "perhaps you could clarify the precise meaning in this context?" Zora explained the nuance carefully, noting that one interpretation would significantly advantage Whitman International while the other reflected a more balanced approach. "The surrounding language suggests the balanced interpretation was intended," she concluded. The Takashi executives nodded in agreement. Richard's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. As the meeting continued, Zora found herself repeatedly called upon to translate increasingly complex passages. It became clear that Richard was testing her, perhaps hoping she would make a mistake that would undermine her credibility. Instead, her precise, nuanced translations impressed everyone present, further cementing her value to the Takashi team. By the meeting's end, the final contract was approved, representing a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As the teams exchanged congratulations, a reporter and photographer appeared at the doorway. "Perfect timing," Richard announced smoothly. "I've arranged for a small press opportunity to commemorate our historic partnership." He gestured for Zora to join him and Mr. Tanaka at the front of the room. "Our company's commitment to discovering and nurturing young talent should be highlighted, don't you think?" The request was a trap, putting Zora in the spotlight while controlling the narrative. If she refused, she risked appearing unprofessional. If she participated, Richard would position himself as her discoverer and mentor, erasing the truth of how their paths had crossed. Before she could decide, Mr. Tanaka intervened. "Miss Jackson is a minor and cannot appear in press materials without parental consent," he stated firmly. "Perhaps we should focus on the executives who negotiated this partnership." Richard's expression flickered with annoyance, but he recovered quickly. Of course. Legal considerations must be respected." As the meeting disbanded, Richard approached Zora directly for the first time since the original boardroom incident. "Impressive work today," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You have a remarkable talent. It's a shame you've chosen to align yourself with people intent on damaging my company." Zora met his gaze steadily. "I'm just doing my job as a translator, Mr. Whitman." His smile never reached his eyes. "We both know it's more than that. The people you've been meeting with Carmen Rodriguez, the others they're disgruntled former employees with personal grudges. Pursuing their agenda will only hurt you in the long run." The revelation that he knew about her contacts sent a chill through Zora, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for your concern," she replied neutrally. Richard leaned closer. "Let me be clear. I can make things very difficult for you and your mother, or I can be a powerful ally. A recommendation from me could open doors to the best schools, the best opportunities. All you need to do is distance yourself from these distractions." It was a bribe, thinly veiled as mentorship. Zora thought of her mother, working night shifts at her new, lower-paying job. She thought of their apartment, which they would have to leave in less than 2 weeks. She thought of all the others who had been silenced by similar tactics. "I appreciate the offer," she said carefully, "but I believe in letting my work speak for itself." Richard's expression hardened. "Then you'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." He turned and walked away, leaving Zora with the distinct impression that a line had been crossed and there would be no turning back. That evening, Zora convened an emergency meeting of the Alliance at Desiree's Community Center office. "Richard knows about all of you," she explained. "He tried to bribe me to stop working with you." Carmen looked alarmed. "This changes things. He'll start applying pressure to everyone connected to this." Marcus nodded grimly. "We need to accelerate our timeline. The longer we wait, the more opportunity he has to undermine us individually." The group spent hours strategizing, compiling their documentation, and preparing for Richard's inevitable counterattack. As Zora walked home that night, her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. Richard Whitman had built his empire through intimidation and exploitation. He wouldn't relinquish power without a fight. But for the first time, he faced something unfamiliar, a unified opposition that included not just current and former employees, but community organizers, legal advocates, and a 13-year-old girl who refused to be silenced. The question now was who would make the next move and how far they were willing to go. The date was circled in red on Zora's calendar. May 15th, the day of Whitman International's press conference, announcing the finalized partnership with Takashi Technologies. Richard had orchestrated the event as a major media opportunity, inviting business journalists from across the country. His PR team had been working overtime to position the deal as a triumph of cross-cultural cooperation, with Richard himself taking center stage as the visionary who made it possible. What the media didn't know was that Richard had another agenda for the event. 3 days earlier, he had called Zora directly. "I expect you to attend the press conference," he stated without preamble. "Mr. Tanaka has already agreed to your participation." Zora's heart raced. What would my role be? Simple. You'll be presented as the young translation prodigy discovered and mentored by Whitman International. A feel-good human interest angle that the press will love. The implication was clear. Richard intended to rewrite history, transforming his humiliation into a story of his own benevolence. "And if I decline?" Zora asked cautiously. Richard's tone hardened. "Then your mother's wrongful termination lawsuit becomes much more complicated. My legal team has prepared a countersuit alleging corporate espionage. We have evidence suggesting she accessed confidential documents during her employment. The threat was as false as it was effective. Tamika had never done anything improper, But fighting such allegations would be financially devastating, even with pro bono legal support. "I'll be there," Zora conceded, her mind already racing with possibilities. The morning of the press conference dawned bright and clear. Zora dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress, her hair neatly braided. Tamika watched her with concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, as they shared a quiet breakfast. "Richard Whitman is dangerous when cornered." Zora nodded resolutely. "That's exactly why we have to do this. He thinks he controls the narrative. Today, we change that." The alliance had prepared meticulously over the preceding days. Each member had a specific role to play, precise timing to maintain. If any single element failed, Richard could easily regain control of the situation. Everything depended on coordination and courage. At precisely 10 o'clock, Zora entered the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton, where the press conference was being held. The space was already filling with journalists, photographers, and business representatives. A podium bearing the Whitman International logo stood on a raised platform at the front, flanked by chairs for the executives. Zora spotted Richard near the stage, surrounded by his senior leadership team. He looked confident, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her mother's rent. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he gave her a curt nod before turning back to his conversation. Marcus Chen, despite his demotion, had managed to secure an invitation to the event. He approached Zora discreetly. "Everything is in place," he murmured. "The others are positioned throughout the audience. Desiree confirmed the community members are outside. Are you ready?" Zora took a deep breath. Yes, the enormity of what they were about to do washed over her. In less than an hour, they would challenge one of the most powerful men in Chicago, risking their careers, reputations, and possibly more. Marcus squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Remember why we're doing this. It's not just about you and your mother anymore." At 10:30, the lights dimmed slightly, and Richard took the stage to polite applause. Behind him, screens displayed the logos of both Whitman International and Takashi Technologies. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "today marks an historic partnership between two global leaders." He launched into a well-rehearsed speech about innovation and cross-cultural cooperation, positioning himself as the architect of this groundbreaking alliance. As he spoke, Zora's thoughts drifted back to all the moments that had led to this confrontation. The day her mother had brought her to Whitman International during spring break. The boardroom where Richard had mocked and humiliated them both. Her mother's wrongful termination. Their impending eviction. The other victims of Richard's discrimination who had suffered in silence until now. Each memory strengthened her resolve. Richard's speech continued with practiced charm. "At Whitman International, we pride ourselves on recognizing talent wherever we find it. Today, I want to share a particularly inspiring example of this commitment." He gestured toward Zora. "We discovered an extraordinary young woman with remarkable linguistic abilities who has played a crucial role in this partnership." The narrative distortion was even more brazen than Zora had anticipated. Richard was completely rewriting history, transforming his public humiliation into a story about his own generosity and vision. "I'd like to invite Zora Jackson to join me on stage," Richard announced with a benevolent smile. "Her story represents everything Whitman International stands for, recognizing potential and creating opportunities regardless of background." As Zora made her way to the stage, she caught sight of her mother slipping into the back of the ballroom. Tamika had taken the morning off from her new job to witness this moment. Their eyes met briefly, and Tamika gave an almost imperceptible nod permission and encouragement in a single gesture. Richard extended his hand as Zora reached the podium, the picture of mentorship for the clicking cameras. "Zora has been instrumental in ensuring accurate communication throughout our negotiations with Takashi Technologies," he continued, maintaining his fiction. "Her future is undoubtedly bright, and Whitman International is proud to have played a role in launching her career." He turned to Zora with a practiced smile. "Perhaps you'd like to say a few words about your experience working with our company?" It was the moment of truth. Zora stepped to the microphone, acutely aware of the journalists recording every word. She began speaking in fluent Japanese, thanking Mr. Tanaka and the Takashi team for their support and mentorship. Richard's expression flickered with confusion and annoyance as the Japanese executives in the audience nodded appreciatively at her words. Then, smoothly transitioning to English, Zora continued. "My journey with Whitman International began quite differently than Mr. Whitman has described," she stated clearly. A murmur rippled through the audience as journalists sensed an unexpected development. Richard shifted uncomfortably beside her, his smile hardening. "3 months ago, my mother, who worked as a cleaner at Whitman International, was forced to bring me to work during a school holiday. While waiting quietly outside a boardroom, I overheard a critical negotiation with Takashi Technologies faltering due to translation issues." Zora's voice remained steady as she recounted the true story of that fateful day, Richard's mockery, his challenge, and the subsequent retaliation against her mother when Zora had demonstrated her abilities. "After proving my translation skills, my mother was reassigned to night shifts, then terminated on false accusations. Our apartment building was purchased by a Whitman subsidiary. Our rent increased beyond affordability. My mother was blacklisted from similar employment throughout the city." Journalists were furiously taking notes now. Richard leaned toward the microphone. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Zora continued, her voice growing stronger. "But what happened to us is not an isolated incident. It reflects a pattern of discrimination that many have experienced at Whitman International." On cue, Carmen Rodriguez stood from her seat in the middle of the ballroom. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez, former Senior Marketing Director at Whitman International. After 15 years of exemplary performance, I was repeatedly passed over for promotion in favor of less qualified white male colleagues." Before Richard could intervene, another person stood. "James Washington, former finance manager. I discovered I was being paid 40% less than white colleagues with identical responsibilities." One by one, members of the alliance rose throughout the audience, each stating their name and experience of discrimination. Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. He signaled frantically to his PR director, who rushed toward the stage. "This is inappropriate and potentially libelous," Richard hissed into the microphone. "Security, please remove Miss Jackson from the stage." Before security could respond, Marcus Chen stood, holding up a flash drive. Marcus Chen, current Director of International Operations at Whitman International. "I have compiled financial records demonstrating statistically significant correlations between race, gender, and compensation across the company. I also have documentation of systematic retaliation against employees who raised concerns about these disparities." The ballroom had erupted into chaos now, with journalists shouting questions and photographers capturing every moment. Richard attempted to regain control, his voice rising above the din. "These are baseless accusations from disgruntled former employees. This press conference is concluded. As security approached the stage, Mr. Tanaka unexpectedly stepped forward from the audience. As Whitman International's newest major partner, Takashi Technologies, is deeply concerned by these allegations. We believe they warrant immediate investigation before our partnership proceeds further." This intervention from such a respected figure changed the dynamics instantly. Several board members of Whitman International, present for the major announcement, huddled together in urgent discussion at the side of the room. Richard's authority was visibly crumbling before everyone's eyes. Desiree Washington seized the moment to make her own announcement from the back of the room. "The Southside Housing Justice Coalition has filed a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development regarding discriminatory housing practices by Whitman Capital Partners, a subsidiary of Whitman International." Outside, local news cameras were capturing footage of community members holding signs protesting Whitman's predatory property acquisitions in minority neighborhoods. The carefully orchestrated press conference had transformed into Richard's worst nightmare, a public exposure of the discriminatory practices he had worked so hard to conceal. As journalists swarmed with questions, Richard attempted one final desperate countermove. Miss Jackson signed a legally binding non-disclosure agreement prohibiting exactly this kind of defamatory speech, he declared, gesturing to his legal counsel. "We will be pursuing immediate legal remedies." Zora met his gaze directly. NDA provisions cannot legally prevent reporting of discrimination or ethical violations to appropriate authorities or in appropriate forums, she responded, quoting the exact language Marcus's legal contacts had prepared for her. Additionally, as a minor, my capacity to enter into such a restrictive agreement without parental consent or court approval is legally questionable at best. The response left Richard momentarily speechless. This 13-year-old girl had outmaneuvered him at every turn. As the situation spiraled further beyond his control, Richard made a tactical retreat, storming off the stage while his PR team frantically attempted damage control. Board members and executives huddled in urgent conferences around the ballroom. Journalists pursued Richard with shouted questions as he pushed through the crowd toward the exit. In the midst of the chaos, Zora found her way back to her mother. Tamika wrapped her in a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Zora held her mother close, watching over her shoulder as Richard Whitman, the powerful billionaire who had tried to crush them, fled from the truth spoken by a 13-year-old girl and the alliance she had helped build. The confrontation was over, but the real battle had just begun. 3 months after the explosive press conference, Zora sat in the newly renovated community center in her neighborhood, surrounded by middle school students eager to learn the basics of Japanese. Sunlight streamed through windows that had once been boarded up, illuminating a space that symbolized the remarkable changes of the past 90 days. Following the public exposure of Whitman International's discriminatory practices, events had unfolded with breathtaking speed. Richard Whitman had initially attempted to discredit the allegations, dismissing them as a coordinated attack by disgruntled former employees. But the evidence compiled by Marcus Chen and the Alliance proved too substantial to ignore. Investigative journalists, sensing a major story, began digging deeper. They uncovered additional cases of discrimination spanning decades, establishing a clear pattern that could not be explained away as isolated incidents. 2 weeks after the press conference, Whitman International's board of directors called an emergency meeting. With the company's stock price plummeting and major clients threatening to withdraw, they voted to place Richard on administrative leave, pending a thorough investigation. By the end of the month, facing overwhelming evidence and pressure from shareholders, the board removed Richard as CEO. The impact extended far beyond Richard's personal downfall. Whitman International underwent a comprehensive restructuring, beginning with the appointment of a special committee to address the systemic issues identified by the alliance. Marcus Chen, reinstated to his original position and later promoted to Chief Diversity Officer, led the development of new policies designed to ensure equity throughout the organization. His role came with actual authority and resources, not just an empty title. For Tamika, justice arrived in the form of a substantial settlement for wrongful termination. Additionally, she was offered a management position in facilities services, a role that recognized her decade of experience and exceptional work ethic. The position came with benefits, appropriate compensation, and a path for further advancement. Whitman Capital Partners, under new leadership, revised its property acquisition strategy. The planned rent increases in Zora and Tamika's building, along with the 6 other properties in minority neighborhoods, were canceled. Residents were offered long-term leases with reasonable terms, and a percentage of units were designated as permanently affordable housing. The Takashi Technologies partnership proceeded, though with significant changes to reflect the company's new direction. Mr. Tanaka, impressed by Zora's courage as much as her linguistic abilities, established a foundation to identify and support talented young people from underserved communities interested in international business and translation. Zora became the first recipient of a full scholarship that would fund her education through college. With financial stability restored, Zora and Tamika moved into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, closer to Zora's school and Tamika's new position. Their new home was modest but comfortable, with enough space for Zora to create a small study filled with language books and global maps. On this bright September afternoon, as Zora guided her young students through basic Japanese phrases, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months. The language classes she now taught twice weekly were part of a community program she had helped establish. bringing educational opportunities to children who might otherwise never be exposed to international languages and cultures. Excellent pronunciation, Deshawn. She encouraged a bright-eyed 10-year-old struggling with a difficult Japanese syllable. Try again, but relax your tongue a little. As the class continued, Zora noticed Desiree Washington slipping quietly into the back of the room. The community organizer had become a close friend and mentor, helping Zora understand how to channel her experience into positive change for others. When the session concluded, Desiree approached with a broad smile. "They've confirmed you as a speaker for next month's Youth Leadership Conference," she announced. "Your story is inspiring a lot of people, Zora." In the months since the confrontation, Zora had spoken at several events about breaking barriers and challenging discrimination. Her message emphasized not just individual courage, but the power of collective action. The Alliance members had remained connected, forming a network that provided support and advocacy for others facing similar situations. Carmen Rodriguez had established a consulting firm specializing in diversity and inclusion strategies for corporations. James Washington now led workshops on recognizing and addressing pay disparities. Each had transformed their negative experience into a platform for positive change. That evening, Zora and Tamika hosted a small dinner gathering at their new apartment. Marcus and his wife joined them, along with Mr. Tanaka, who was visiting Chicago to review the progress of the foundation he had established. As they shared a meal and conversation, the television in the background showed a business news segment featuring Richard Whitman. Now consulting for a mid-sized company, he appeared notably diminished, his former arrogance replaced by a carefully measured demeanor. The camera caught him watching a video of Zora speaking at a recent conference, his expression unreadable. "Does it bother you?" Marcus asked quietly, noticing Zora's attention on the screen. Seeing him still working in the industry after everything he did, Zora considered the question thoughtfully. "No," she finally answered. What mattered wasn't punishing one person, but changing the systems that gave him so much unchecked power. Mr. Tanaka nodded approvingly. "Very wise. True change requires transformation of structures, not just individuals." The conversation shifted to more personal topics: Zora's recent acceptance into an advanced international studies program, Tamika's success in her new management role, the flourishing partnership between Whitman International and Takashi Technologies that had brought new jobs to the community. Later that evening, after their guests had departed, Tamika found Zora sitting quietly on their small balcony, gazing at the city lights. "Penny, for your thoughts?" she asked, joining her daughter. Zora smiled. "I was just thinking about that day in the boardroom. How terrified I was when I picked up that contract." Tamika laughed softly. "I was more terrified than you were. I thought for sure we'd both be out on the street." "We almost were," Zora pointed out, "but instead," she gestured toward the city spread before them, encompassing all the changes their stand had created. "Instead, you showed everyone that even the most powerful people can be held accountable when enough brave voices speak together," Tamika finished, squeezing her daughter's hand. The following morning brought an acceptance letter from the prestigious Global Young Leaders Program, along with an invitation to study in Japan the following summer. As Zora shared the news with her mother, their celebration was interrupted by a knock at the door. A group of neighborhood children stood on the threshold, eager for the informal weekend language lesson Zora had promised them. Watching her daughter lead the children to their small dining table, now transformed into a classroom, Tamika felt a profound sense of pride. The cleaning lady's daughter, who had once been told to remain invisible, was now visible in the most powerful way as a catalyst for change, an inspiration to others, and a living example of what courage and determination could accomplish. As Zora began the lesson, her voice clear and confident in both English and Japanese, she embodied the message she now shared with audiences across the city. True power came not from wealth or position, but from the courage to speak truth and the wisdom to build alliances that could transform individual challenges into collective progress. What would you do if you discovered a hidden talent that could change not just your life, but the lives of many others? Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on Zora's journey from invisible girl to powerful catalyst for change. If this story inspired you, Please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one voice, when joined with others, can create real and lasting change in our world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most powerful words are the ones spoken by those who were never expected to speak at all. This powerful story teaches us that true courage often emerges in unexpected moments when we're forced to choose between staying silent and speaking truth. Zora's journey demonstrates how talents cultivated in private can become powerful tools for justice when the moment demands. Her linguistic abilities, developed through self-discipline and passion despite limited resources, became the catalyst for exposing deep-rooted discrimination. The story also highlights how systems of oppression rely on isolation, making each victim feel alone in their struggle. When Zora connected with others who had experienced similar discrimination, their individual stories transformed into compelling evidence of systemic problems that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents. We learn that powerful people often maintain their position by making others invisible, but that invisibility can become a strategic advantage. Because Richard underestimated Zora, seeing only a cleaning lady's daughter rather than a brilliant young mind, she was able to observe and understand his organization in ways others couldn't. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that meaningful change requires more than just exposing injustice. It demands rebuilding broken systems with new rules and opportunities. Victory isn't just about punishing wrongdoers, but creating structures that prevent future harm and open doors for those previously excluded. Have you ever witnessed discrimination or prejudice in your workplace or school? What did you do in that moment? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others who are currently facing similar situations. If Zora's courage resonated with you, hit that like button to help more people discover this story of standing up against prejudice with dignity and intelligence. Have you ever discovered a hidden talent or skill that others underestimated because of who you are or where you come from? How did you prove them wrong? Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of ordinary people creating extraordinary change by challenging injustice. And if you know someone struggling to find their voice in the face of discrimination, share this video with them as a reminder that they're not alone. Thank you for joining us in celebrating the power of education, courage, and community to transform lives and systems. Remember, sometimes the most powerful force for change is the voice that was never expected to speak.